What's up, everybody? It's David Ariev here again for another fantastic Octane tutorial brought to you by Eyedesyn.com. This time we're going to be creating some beautiful abstract topographic renders using Octane Scatter and just a single cube. Let's do this thing. Alright, so here are some renders I've been creating recently with Octane Scatter. It's easy to get a variety of different looks from this kind of volcano looking structure through to these more sliced looks. To veins and other interesting nature kind of patterns. And another thing I'd like to point out is that I'm using these kind of anamorphic looking bokeh that are vertical and kind of more well defined, so I'll show you guys how to create that a little bit later. But going through these, it just kind of feels like cheating because it's so fun to play around in this world and it's so easy to get really cool looking results. So this style was kind of popularized by this guy named Lee Griggs a few years ago, and he did these renders in Maya and Arnold, and they kind of blew up on the internet. And then at some point Chris Schmidt recorded a tutorial showing how to do this in physical render using the hair module. So I realized that this is like very overdone, but I think it's in this case a really good way to demo Octane Scatter and to show some kind of unique features of how this is done in Octane. Alright, so here we are in our blank slate Cinema 4D in Octane, and I'm going to add in a plane here and scale it up a little bit, and then I'll add in an Octane Daylight, which I have a button here for, but you can find it under Objects, Octane Daylight, and then I'll fire this off into the renderer and I'll rotate this around here so that we get a little bit more direct light. And then I want to just drop in an Octane Scatter, which I also have a button for, but again, Objects, Octane Scatter. And finally, I want to create the cube primitive that we're going to be scattering. So here I'll just drop in a cube, and I want it to be 1 by 200 by 1, so just a really skinny looking cube here that we're going to create over 1 million instances of. So if I drop this into Octane Scatter here, it's very much like a C4D cloner set to object mode, so I can choose the surface distribution and then drop my plane into the surface, and already we've got a crap ton of cubes. And we can crank this up to, let's go up to 10,000, and you can see it updates really quickly, and then we can go up to 100,000, no problem. And so this is why I like doing this kind of technique in Octane, because Scatter makes it so easy to handle this vast amount of geometry without a hitch, and it just renders super fast. So the next thing I want you to pay attention to are these position, scale, and distribution parameters. So a quick way to demo what these shader parameters do is just add in a default C4D noise here, and then it looks as if nothing's happened, but we can crank this minimum slider and it'll start to cull these instances down based on this noise. And then we could do the same thing for position here, and again, nothing's happened until we enter in some kind of value, so I'll just do 222, and now it's bumping all of these up. And if I actually take this back down, you'll be able to see it a bit better. We've got these kind of peaks and valleys here that already look pretty interesting, so you can see where this is going. And same thing goes for the scale. I'll show you what this does, though. In this case, the scale might not be as effective because this is just kind of thinning out the cubes in certain areas, and that's not necessarily the look I want in this case, but it's definitely useful for other scenes, like when you're doing grasses, or like with my city tutorial, it was helpful to have a variety of scale. So we've kind of seen this before, but I'm going to expand on this a bit too. We can also go in and, of course, change the noise type. So we could go to an electric noise and get something a little more complex. So I'll pop this into both of these here. You'll see this looks pretty different. And then this really comes together even more when we say we crank this to 1 million instances. It's going to take a little bit longer to render, but we're going to get a much more interesting look. So there you go. That's really filling out, and you can see kind of where this would be going. Okay, I'm just going to clear that out. Alright, so I'm going to take the number of instances back down to 100,000, so this should update a little bit more quickly. And next I want to show you just one more little useful feature here. So if I take a look at this plane here, and I'm just going to turn off Octane Scatter so we're not seeing it, and I'll hit C to make it editable, and I'll go to my polygons here, and I'll just make some kind of selection, and then I can do Shift-C, and then enter in set vertex weight. So this is just a quick way to get a vertex map, and I'll set it to 100%. Now you can see I've got this vertex map, and if you double click this vertex map, you can actually get to this paint tool, which will allow you to add and subtract from the vertex map. So once we've got that, we can actually go into this Octane Scatter here and drop in the vertex map, and this will also limit where these are scattering to, and you can combine that with the techniques I showed you before, so we could have all this stuff going on, but then limit it to a certain area or certain polygons, which can be super useful. Alright, so I'm just going to clear these out, and we're going to start fresh. Alright, so now I want to use an actual image to drive this versus these procedural noises. And I think that any kind of topographic or aerial image works pretty well. So I'm going to go with this hurricane because this is a fun one to start out with. And then I'll just take this and drop this into our position here. And already you can see this kind of interesting swirly thing we got going on. Now we can also cull these instances on either side to create maybe a more interesting look. And again, we could take this to 1,000,000 to see kind of what our final look would be. This will take a second to update. So that's already pretty neat looking. You can see where this is going. Maybe I want to pull this a little bit back. And you can see with 1,000,000 instances, it takes a little bit longer to update. So let's just take this back down a little bit. And then if we wanted to, we can also invert these. So say I went to C40 Octane here and inverted this, we would get kind of the opposite effect where it's looking more like this mountain peak if I pull this in. So this is that kind of volcano look that I showed you before. It was just this inverted hurricane map. And again, back to 1,000,000 so we can see this final look. One thing I'd like to point out is that you can't control these textures in here with Octane's node system, so we're kind of stuck with layers. So right now I've got this invert layer with a hurricane inside of it. So in order to control these, we can still add all of the Octane nodes, but we're doing it through the layer system. So I could have a color correction with the invert inside of that, and then the hurricane. Alright, next I'd like to create a bit of a metallic material for these instances, so I can just go to Materials, Octane Glossy Material, and I'll take the diffuse all the way down to black, and then I'll take the index up and give it a little bit of roughness, and take the specular to maybe more of let's do a blue color. Let's do a blue metal here. Alright, so that works there, and then we'll drop that on the cube. And everything's darkened down, so let's boost in a bit more daylight here, bring the power up. Another thing I like to do is go into path tracing mode, and that fills in the shadows a little bit. So for this, I've been kind of gravitating towards path tracing. And let's add in our Octane camera here, and go to our camera imager and maybe up the exposure a bit, and then go to our post-processing and add in a bit of that bloom that we all love so much. And now you can see I'm getting a bit of noise in this area here. So if I open up my Octane settings and I undock this, what I like to do with path tracing is just take the GI clamp all the way down until it totally destroys any of the light we've got in the scene, and then bring it up until it looks good enough. So here we kind of want to bring it up until we're not seeing much of a change. Like after this point, we're really not seeing much of a change. So I'd say just go until it's flooding enough light in, and then call that good. And you can see this will clean up a lot faster and better this way. Alright, so this starts to look a lot more interesting when we create a second instance of this cube and a second instance of this material. And I'll drop this on the new one and then change the color. And see, now we're getting different sections colored differently. So the reason this is happening is this, if I remove this shader in the distribution here, we would just get a random distribution. but the shader itself is actually driving where the different colors appear. So say I just alternate between blue and purple here a bunch of times. You can see we're going to get this interesting striped look. So from here I can create a couple more of these. So let's make this one gold. Drop that on a couple of these here. And then let's do a red. Alright, so I'm going to make one more of these guys here. Let's do another blue. And I'll replace this blue up here. Now, here's a little bit of additional magic. If I pipe in a random color node here into the specular, if we look up here, what's going to happen is we're going to get all these random colors in this one section. So in between this, I can drop a Gaussian spectrum, which will kind of colorize those. Before we just had black and white. Now we've got some colors going on, and the more I take this width down, the more rainbowy it's going to get. And then from there, I can add in a color correction node here and just use this to shift the hue. So say I want more kind of blues and purples, I can go that away. Now I can also take this wavelength this way if I want it to be a thinner slice of the spectrum. So to just get that to be a little more subtle. And then from there I could crank up the saturation even more, so I could have them really saturated and then just swing the hue around and we'll get some different interesting looks. So there you go, there's some kind of cyan and purpley stuff going on. And now let's do the same thing for one of these purple guys here. I'm not loving how saturated this purple is, so let's just go back to our previous node here, and I can grab these three, right click and copy, then go back to the purple one, and then right click and paste, and pipe this into the specular. And then for this one, let's just swing the hue to something slightly different. So let's go this way, and maybe let's take the wavelength up here, and let's zoom in so we can actually see what we're doing. Let's bring the width back down, and then let's keep shifting the hue. I think I like those colors there. That's looking interesting to me. And now if we crank this back to 1,000,000 again, we can kind of check what this would look like with our high number of instances. That's looking a little more interesting. I don't love the gold. I think I want it to be a little more orangey. So let's tweak that. So I'll just take the specular here and just kind of shift it a little bit more orange. I think I like that better. Alright, so now I'm going to try to add a bit more visual interest to the scene. I can duplicate this plane and then turn it on and then kind of bring it upwards. And now, since this isn't the plane getting scattered onto, it'll actually intersect with the geometry, which is what I want. And you can see, because we created these metallic materials, they're not collecting as much light as a standard material would. So this is looking like really blown out and glowy, but that's just because this daylight is cranked so high. So this is really what's going on in the scene if we kind of bring it down like that. But what I want to do is maybe leave that there and rotate this daylight around to get a bit more of an interesting lighting look going on. So if we bring it around that way and kind of bring this highlight across, I think this starts to look a little bit more awesome. So from here, let's just add in a texture to this plane. And I'm actually kind of liking this weird blue glow that we're getting here. But what I want to do is let's turn off scatter for a second so we can just focus on this. And here I just want to create a simple displacement material using the same image that we used before. So let's click on Add Displacement and then jump into our displacement and drop in our hurricane here. And I'll take this to 4K. I don't think, yeah, the resolution's not even 4K, so that's fine. And let's bring this displacement up. Okay, so this is totally blown out. So what we can do is we could reduce the daylight, or we could just go to our camera imager, which I cranked up before, and kind of bring this exposure back down. And now you can actually see what's going on. We're getting this pretty sweet looking displacement hurricane thing going on, almost like ice already without even any work. We've got some artifacts on the sides that we can clean up really easily by just jumping into our displacement node here. Let's go to our node editor this time. And instead of a bitmap material, this is not as controllable. Let's drop in an image texture, and let's just copy this path here. If I go to the shader, I'm going to copy this path to this, and then I'll replace it. And so now we've got our texture in an image texture node, and I can hit UV transform, which will add in a transform node. And in the newest version of Octane, this is locked by default, which is awesome. And if we just tick this up by 0.01, it'll resolve that clipping issue, which is an issue with the edge of the picture being treated as if it's like this extreme displacement. So if you just take this to 1.01, that solves the problem. So let's take this diffuse down, and then let's change this from a diffuse to a glossy material. That's looking pretty crazy, though we're getting these extreme fireflies going on, and that's because it's a little too glossy. So let's just bring up the roughness, and you can see this starts to smooth out and catch those highlights in a much more interesting way. And then let's just take the diffuse to more of a blue. Cool, it kind of looks like ice right now. And the index is already good at 1.3. Now, real water would have some subsurface scattering, but we don't need to get into that. This is like cool enough for now. So let's turn this scatter back on, and you can see what's going on. Now, these other materials are much darker in comparison, so either we need to bring these up or we need to bring these down to try to match these all in the same lighting conditions, because right now these are looking really dingy. So let's go ahead and take this diffuse way down to try to match all these conditions together. Okay, and let's bring this exposure back to where we had it before, which was like 2.6 or so. And this displacement is just way too high, so if I jump back in here, let's take this down to 55. And also I think that was soaking up a bunch of the light, so this is looking a lot more interesting here. And now maybe we can just take this plane and bring it up a bit more. Alright, so first off, I think let's do a little bit of tweaking. I think that I brought this diffuse down a little bit too far. So that brings a little bit more nice blueness into this water slash ice slash whatever it is. And I still think the displacement is too high, and it's causing some ugly artifacts that we can see. So what we can do is we can go into this displacement here, and I'm going to choose 25. And if we want to smooth this out even more here, let me just kind of come on, and you can see these weird looking blocks that are probably due to the JPEG compression. So what you can do is you can come down to the filter and go to Gaussian, and then just kind of crank this up. So this is going to blur the displacement map. So there we go. You can see that's totally affected it, though maybe it's too much. Let's see what happens at about 3. Yeah, we can still see those blocks a little bit. So maybe let's go to 5. I think that's good enough, and that's keeping the detail that I want. So from out here, that looks pretty good. And I've got the feeling like there's not enough light in this scene. We've helped it by going to path tracing. So if I go compare store render buffer, you can see that if we were in direct lighting here, it would be even darker. And a lot of this is due to the fact that I've chosen this specular material. So if these materials here had more diffuse in them, you would see that it would totally bring tons of light in, but I kind of wanted that metallic thing going on. So what I could do is I could just kind of crank up the roughness instead, and that will kind of spread that light out a bit more. So let's go compare store render buffer. So this is more roughness, and if it's less, you can see it takes longer for the light to penetrate. We get these more intense highlights, which is really cool. but the light doesn't kind of get into these crevices as much. So depending on which look you like more, go for whatever you want. So another thing I'm noticing is that these are just kind of desaturated feeling. So what I could do is just come in here and actually boost the saturation of the specular a little bit to get even more of that orangey vibe going on. And then beyond that, I can just play with my camera imager and maybe add in a bit more to the gamma here. So that's going to make it a lot more milky, but then I can come into one of my favorite presets here, which is the Ektachrome 400 XCD, and that's going to get way too intense. So we can kind of dial these numbers against each other, but you can see that's adding in a bunch more contrast. And then we kind of want to work against this super orange that's brought in, so we can go to this white point here and kind of boost this until we get back to something a little more reasonable. That's looking a bit pink. So to get it less pink, we actually go towards pink counterintuitively. See, that is looking a little bit better. And let's boost the gamma a bit more and drop this exposure so you can see that this has added more light into the scene. And now I'm going to go back to path tracing, and these crevices will also fill in a lot more once, remember, we're going to go up to 1,000,000 instances, so this is going to be more our final look, and this is obviously a lot more evenly lit at this point. And beyond this, I would just change the actual lighting to affect it. So you can see how altering the lighting, you get totally different looks. And if we want less of a harsh kind of contrasty light, we could increase the turbidity, which is kind of like more of an overcast day, and then up the exposure and the power. So let me show you before and after real quick. So if I go compare, store render buffer, and then up the turbidity and the power, we're effectively reducing the contrast and flooding a bit more light into those kind of cracks. Though in this case, I actually think I like the more strong sunlit look, so I'm going to go back. I think that this is looking too rough, so maybe we come in here and take the roughness down and bring the diffuse a little bit darker. There we go. I'm liking the way that's looking. And now I think I'm going to go in and kind of add in more layers of these cubes. So the more we do this, the more kind of variations we're going to get, and the more striping. And to make this less of a painful process, I'll bring this back down to 100,000 instances. And I think I want to see more of the red. And this is the fun of it, is getting these dramatically different looks just by a little experimentation. In this case, I feel like I want to lose the yellow. That's looking ugly to me, so maybe let's just go in and completely shift this. And I think I like the look of this green. I think I just want to see more of it. There we go. That's looking pretty sweet to me. I feel like we could potentially reduce the height that these cubes are getting bumped upwards. So maybe let's go like 125 and see what that looks like. Now that's going to bury itself down in here. So at this point, we could either move this plane down or this plane upwards. So this is the one that's being scattered on. So let's just kind of shove this up through there. And we could even rotate this around by 90 degrees to get a totally different look. So that to me looks even more interesting, almost like this crazy whirlpool. Now, one thing that's really going to bring this together is some shallow depth of field. So let's come into our camera imager here and go to our thin lens and just start cranking this guy here, this aperture. And I want to take it to maybe 15, might be too much. But I kind of like this look because it combines this complexity that we expect to see on a massive scale with something that looks pretty small at the same time because of how the depth of field is. Now I want to turn off autofocus so I can actually pick where my focus point is, because I want to see this ridge here a little bit better. So that kind of gives it this nice split between out of focus here and here, but not here. And to lose the black off the edges, what I could do is I could just duplicate this plane and scale it up. Maybe bring it down a bit. And this is just a total cheat to kind of extend the bounds here so that when we're looking off the side, we're not seeing pure black. And now we're also probably going to want to push in a bit and find a composition in here somewhere. I'm going to pick focus on this ridge here. Finally, I'm going to boost our instances back to 1,000,000 because I'm happy with this composition and I'm not going to be doing a whole lot of tweaking past this with the camera. Now you can see how much more light this brought in by upping those instances. So let's come into our camera imager and just drop the exposure. Okay, now I'm feeling like this is actually too many instances because I want to sense those actual cube primitives and sense that it's being made up by these individual kind of grains versus this look here, which is almost too solid. So I'm going to take this back down to 200,000 instead of 100,000. And the other thing I'd like to do is I'm going to totally backtrack and change this to a higher displacement setting. So I'm going to go to something like 180. And because I think I like the dimensionality that this is giving us. And now if I boost these planes back upwards here, we can kind of bring that water surface back into play. And now I'm going to kind of come around here and let's zoom in. So I can hold down 2 and right click. And now we should be able to actually sense that these are individual little guys that are making up a bigger picture, which is what I want. So that's looking pretty cool to me. I think I want to pick focus a little bit further up here. And now let's talk about bokeh. So if I come to my thin lens tab here, there are a bunch of controls for bokeh that will make it look a lot more interesting. So for one, if we crank this aperture edge all the way up, I'll let this refine for a second. And then I'll go to compare store render buffer. And now I'll take it back down and let that refine. So if I do this A/B wipe, hopefully you'll be able to see that with the higher aperture edge, it really defines these bokeh a lot more. They look more circular, and we get a clearer kind of outer rim with a thinner inner circle. And to me, that looks more photographic and interesting in many cases. And the other thing that I'd like to do here is I'm going to take this aperture aspect ratio to 2. And this is a tip from Jan Urschel. I saw his stream the other day on Learn Squared that you can make these anamorphic looking bokeh by stretching the aspect ratio to 2 to 1. And if you've ever actually seen an anamorphic lens, it has an oval shaped aperture. And what that does is it stretches out the bokeh to this kind of elongated vertical look. And we're used to seeing this in really high-end films. We're used to seeing these kind of stretched out bokeh. And if you've ever seen any J.J. Abrams film, you know, the bokeh are stretched and there's also these obvious anamorphic lens flares because it's another property of the anamorphic lens that it stretches out the flares like this. So we intrinsically are used to this look and we like it. So I think it's pretty cool to be able to take this look and place it into our renders. So you can kind of see these bokeh are starting to get stretched. It's subtle. Now, if I want to make this even more overt, I'll just bring this way up and you can see how elongated this is starting to get. So we don't want this much, but 2 gives us this really nice subtle look. Another thing we can do though is if we want, we could take the bokeh roundedness down to 0, and now this bokeh side count will take effect where we get these hexagonal bokeh. I'll crank up the aperture edge so you can see this a little bit better, but now that this bokeh roundedness is down to 0, this side count will take effect. And many lenses have this kind of hexagonal aperture, so to see this better, I could just duplicate this daylight for a second and rotate it around until it's kind of blasting the camera a bit more. And now here in a second, we should be able to see these kind of take shape a bit better. Okay, so I've zoomed in a bunch and brought the camera around to a different angle, so this should be a lot more obvious now with these hexagonal bokeh. But I'm going to go back to where I was, which was here, And I'm going to go back to my favorite anamorphic bokeh. Change the light back to where it was. Take the bokeh roundedness back up to 1 and the aperture aspect ratio back up to 2. Alright, so let's do a quick aside about rendering this with adaptive sampling. So if we look right now, I can set my samples to something like 5,000 for instance. And I'm just going to speed this up and let this render all the way to 5,000 samples so we can see kind of a base example of what this image would look like in terms of the noise without adaptive sampling. So we're just going to let it brute force up to 5,000 samples, and it says it's going to take about 9 minutes. Alright, so I've slogged through this 9 minutes here and we've hit 5,000 samples. And so this is 5,000 samples across the board. It's treating every pixel in this image equally. And if I were to render this same image in the picture viewer at 1920 by 1080, it would take at least twice this time. So we're looking at least 20 to 25 minutes per frame at these settings. And if you look, this image is still pretty noisy in certain areas. So I would never be able to truly clean up this noise. You can see if I zoom in here, we've got some noise in these shadows. It's not too bad, and for an animation, you know, this amount of noise would be fine, but 20 minutes per frame is kind of absurd. And I'm on two 980 Ti's right now. If I were on my rig with four 980 Ti's, that would be half the time, so it would be maybe like 10 or 12 minutes per frame. That's still a lot. So we can actually improve this with adaptive sampling. Let's go to compare store render buffer so we kind of keep a memory of this state. Alright, so let's turn on adaptive sampling, and I'm going to start with a really high noise threshold. And right here we've got the minimum samples of 256. That means it's going to go through 256 samples treating every pixel identically, and that's kind of like a safety so that we know that everything's getting at least treated to some degree with samples. But past that, it's going to use this noise threshold to determine certain parts of the image are clean and certain parts are still noisy, and it'll just focus on those noisy areas. So if you see, as we're past 256, some of these areas are going to start to go green. And once they're green, Octane is saying, don't focus on this anymore. We're going to focus all of our samples on the parts of the image that are still noisy. So this whole water area, which is much less detailed than all these little individual kind of cubes, is going to go green first because there are a lot fewer bounces to calculate and there's a lot less intricacy going on in there. So we're going to see this all kind of getting taken over by green first, and then Octane is going to ignore those areas. Because we've set this threshold so high, this is going to quickly all go green. Okay, so we haven't even hit 5,000 samples and now it's done at 2 minutes. Now the question is, are we actually cleaner than before? So if we enable our A/B comparison, the answer is no, this is actually much noisier than before because it hit that threshold which was too high. So we want to kind of bring this down. If we were down at 0, this would be back to our original model. It's as if that wasn't on at all. But if we're around, say, 0.1, let's see what happens. I'll refresh this render so we can see. Okay, we still haven't hit 250. Now we're starting to see that green take over much of the image. And so Octane will be able to focus on just these really noisy parts, but because we've set that adaptive sample a lot lower, you can see that now it's actually focusing much more tightly on these areas in here and in the bokeh that are really noisy. Cool, so it's already done at 2 minutes and 13 seconds, and it blasted through the rest of those samples. Now let's compare it to before. Getting closer, still not quite there. Let's try to bring that sample noise threshold even lower. Let's go to 0.05 and I'll refresh. Okay, now it's got a much bigger chunk that it thinks is noisy, so it's going to take a little bit longer, but just on this section. So this is kind of an optimizing process, figuring out where to put that noise threshold that you're going to get the most bang for your buck, essentially. Okay, so now something interesting has happened. It's hit this max samples, and this is as much as it's cleaned up. So if we go back to main, we can go back to our compare, enable A/B comparison, and now we should see that these two results are pretty comparable, but we're only at 417 versus the 9 minutes from before. Now here's another thing we can do. Because we ran out of samples, we can just boost this. Say we boost this to something crazy like 25,000. This is going to keep rendering, but it's going to continue focusing on just these small areas. So these will clean up, and it's going to blast through these samples a lot faster. So let's let this run for a second. Now with just a few more seconds, it's really cleaned up these areas, and it's no longer even focusing up in this ridge up here that we were looking, because it's considered clean, and it's just getting these last few little bits that are really noisy, and you can see we're plowing through these samples at a really, really fast rate. So at this point, I can't even see the little bits that it's focusing on, but it's going to finish at about 5 minutes and 30 seconds, and that's going to get us an extremely clean result, and a much better result than the one we had before. Alright, so now I'm going to show you how I would get that kind of sliced look. So we want to change this from surface distribution to vertex, but the issue is that I'm cloning onto a plane that's been made editable. And I did that because I was showing you some vertex map stuff, but I want to use a plane where I can control the segments easily. So I'm just going to bring in a new plane. I'm going to drop it underneath the one that we're cloning onto right now, and I'm going to reset the PSR, and we'll just use this instead. And now we want to scale this plane up. We got the position right, but not the scale. So at this point, we want to add in the maximum number of segments. So I'm just going to max this out on one of these axes here. And now you can see that we're getting this kind of interesting sliced look. In this case, I don't think it makes sense to have this hole cut out. So let's go back to our Octane Scatter here and reduce this. And then we can bring this up too. So we're not actually using this image to remove any of the instances. Now, if we want an even more intense kind of slicing going on, we can just go back to our plane and maybe give it 50 segments. And in the case where it's not updating properly, you can just tick off Octane Scatter and then turn it back on, and there we go. So let's widen out our focal length here and maybe reduce the amount of shallow depth of field. So let's go to our thin lens here and go down to 5. And this is kind of cool here. Maybe we could also try switching these numbers around. So say we do 55 and max this one out. And again, just jog this so it updates properly. This is kind of another interesting look here. And maybe we take the plane that's being cloned onto and bring these up out of the water a little bit further. So this plane here. And we can rotate our daylight around, north offset here, until we get a different look. And then maybe just also rotate it by hand. Okay, now we're getting some interesting backlight, but it's too high. I want it to be more on the horizon so we get that kind of orangey light coming in. There we go. See, now that's starting to feel a little sunsetty. Now maybe we can just play around with the north offset here and bring it around to the side so that it's just kind of backlighting this whole setup here, and to me that looks a little bit more interesting. And I just came in here and found a slightly different composition that allowed me to see the individual building blocks a little bit better. And now maybe I feel like I want to put this back down into the water a bit more, and then actually boost the overall displacement essentially. So let's take this up to like 250 and then drop this down further. We could do a really long lens look by holding down 2 and right clicking, and then pull way out. And now we're going to have to adjust the focus. So let's make this super extreme. And now you notice that everything looks like it's in focus because we've gone so far away. So at this point, we're going to have to compensate with the shallow depth of field and probably crank this up a lot more. So there's 25 on the aperture. And let me move my little gizmo for the light in here a little bit more. And we can make this even lower in the sky until we get something pretty like that. And I don't like how much red there is in here, so I can kind of just mix these up and totally change around the distribution. Okay, so I'm liking this, but I'm not loving how the colors are. So what I can do is I can just duplicate these like crazy and just keep on going, and you can see it gets thinner and thinner up top until I've got a lot more different colors. Okay, and I can just move around and get a bunch of different interesting looks this way. Maybe I'll reduce the amount of shallow depth of field at this point. I think I'm liking this composition a little bit better. I like having this around the outside. It's pretty interesting. But now I've lost that light, so I can just probably swing this around until we pick it back up. But now the issue is I don't love how much it's blowing out the scene, so maybe I kind of raise it up a little bit. So at that angle, it's a lot more subtle. And now again, if I just rotate it on the north offset, I can kind of play around with where that's hitting the water. Liking those little sparkles in there, and then I could probably just take down my gamma a little bit, or the exposure, and reveal that a little bit more. Okay, and maybe I'll give this a lot of contrast like this, but then a lot more bloom. Alright, so here's our final result with this, but here's what's so fun is that I can just switch this back to surface and we get our other look with this same lighting setup and composition and focal length and all the stuff that we've done. We could even play with cranking this up past 1 million instances for this angle now and get a totally different, interesting look. So here's where this gets really fun, is when you just start trying out different images. You've got the whole thing rigged up, but you just want to pop in a completely different image. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use some of these maps from our friend, the French Monkey. So if you look, he's got these landscape kits, tfmstyle.com, or Retina Pack. So Retina Pack is the one that I'm going to use, and they're these just grayscale maps from World Machine that he's generated. Really, really pretty stuff. So I'm going to go and grab those here. Alright, so let's try one of these like this one. And this is going to totally redistribute the way that the colors are sorted. So we'll see that here in a second. There you go. And let's just drop this in to this one as well. And for these, I think I'm going to lose the water surface. So let's see which plane this is on. So it's on plane 3. Let's just get rid of the water surface for the others. Cool, and so now we've got this very unique world to play around in. If I tilt down, you can kind of see into these valleys here. Maybe for this one I won't make it so displaced, so I could take this and maybe set it down to 100. So that's looking pretty cool right there. And maybe I don't want this to be a ridge, maybe I want it to be valley. So I could just go and invert this, C40 Octane invert. Okay, so this is going to totally change our setup here. So I think that looks pretty awesome. And I could maybe widen the camera lens by holding down 2 and right clicking. You can see our overall structure we've got going here. And now we can kind of pull on in and bury ourselves in this. And now obviously we want to pick focus on something. And now our shallow depth of field is too much, so let's take it down to 5. Let's pick focus there. Cool, that's pretty interesting. Let's mess around with the lighting real quick. And let's take this back down to 100,000 so it's not bogging down so much. There we go. Now let's rotate our daylight around. Maybe let's just try messing with the north offset first. See if we see anything coming in. There we go. We got some red light beaming in. Let's boost the power. And then let's just start to rotate it. Alright, so I've found a camera angle that I like, and now I can just kind of play with the lighting here. So I'll rotate around this daylight, and now we can get some really interesting looking shadows, almost like the Grand Canyon. I could boost the power, and now I just want to rotate this around until I'm seeing this really strong highlight coming in. And if I don't want it to be so blown, I can increase the turbidity, which will kind of decrease the contrast of the scene a little bit. So maybe that's nice. I like seeing this kind of rim off of these structures here. If I wanted to, I could change the sun color to be less orange, and then we get more of this kind of brighter daylight look, though in this case I kind of like the orange. And if I want to see maybe some bigger patterns and bigger stripes, I could reduce the numbers of these cubes. This worked for our previous scene, but in this case we might want some bigger patterns. Maybe I want a blue one on top, so let's kind of play around with this. Let's try green. Or we could try one of the purple ones, which actually has one of those random color nodes in it, so we'll get a bunch of different colors on the top. You can see now we've got all this color variation on top, which is kind of interesting. Alright, let's try a totally different map and see what we get. All sorts of really cool stuff to choose from here. Let's try something like this one. And sometimes it's fun to just let an entirely different map drive the color patterns. So here we've got a very different looking image just because we're driving the color with this other image here. So I'm going to pop this in here and see what we get. And this is why I love this so much, because I didn't do anything except switch the image, and now we've got this crazy looking stuff going on here. This is why it feels like cheating to me. Alright, so I saved this frame out, but let's move around this scene and see what else we can find. And just by rotating down, we're getting a ton of prettiness here. Let's maybe reduce the shallow depth of field down to something like 7. There we go. I think I'm liking that more. So already this is another super nice composition. So there are just so many different shots we can find in here. I really enjoy this process because it feels like creating a set and then going out to this other world and being a photographer and finding different pictures and compositions within that place. Alright, just for fun, let's try one last one. Let's go for something like this.
And now we're getting these beautiful vein-like structures, and the sun's hitting it at this really nice angle. So that about does it for this technique. I hope you have fun going out and creating your own kind of renders with these weird scatter compositions.
So we've learned in a lot more detail how to use Octane Scatter, how adaptive sampling works, and some tricks with shallow depth of field and bokeh. Thanks a ton for watching, and I can't wait to see your creative take on this technique.